I'm Eli Arnold. I'm a city council candidate in District 4. And I guess, you know, there's been some conversation back and forth, especially between me and you, Jesse, about deflection, and we ought to have a conversation about it. It's just to bring in Mike in. And yeah, just an opportunity to talk about different viewpoints and work through some stuff and in a non-confrontational kind of discussion kind of way.
And I'm Mike Marshall, candidate in District 2, person in long-term recovery. Have been working in the addiction space for the last 7 years here in Oregon, founder and executive director of Oregon Recovers. And I don't think there's a lot of space probably between us. But addiction, the addiction crisis is one of the underlying reasons that I got into this race. I think the city needs some folks on the city council who really understand not just the criminal justice aspect of this problem, but also the substance use disorder issues around it, and how do we actually effectively get people, either prevent people from becoming addicted or using substances, or get them into recovery. And the conversation up till now has just been too binary, like decriminalization, recriminalization, and not about intervention and engagement. So
I work as a police officer downtown, and for the last year and a half, fentanyl, specifically fentanyl dealers, have been my everyday. But even beyond and before that, it really is just about people who are in that like late stage addiction,
right,
who are using on the street, who are at risk of overdose or can no longer manage the other aspects of their life. And super tragic, and obviously people desperately in need of some sort of intervention. And so, yeah, I think effective intervention is the goal.
Well, and I think context matters, right? Like the addiction rate in Oregon is 18.2% of the population, maybe even higher than that in the most recent data. And, less than 0.5% of people are houseless, right? And so there's a whole set of folks that are using fentanyl and meth and alcohol in their, at some level functioning, keeping a home or whatever the case may be. And we don't have a system for them either. And that's why some folks are ending up on the street. Homelessness, houselessness, there's all kinds of reasons for that. And a lot of people actually start using meth when they become homeless so that they can stay up at night and it's safer for them. But yeah, we don't have the infrastructure, right? We closed the sobering center where you guys could drop someone off who was inebriated, whether on meth, fentanyl, alcohol. And, the city spent $1.5 million on a consultant trying to get it reopened, and that collapsed. And to me, that's not a reflection of it being a complicated issue. It's a matter of there's just not a sense of, we need to address the underlying issues here, which is addiction and substance use, and the fact that we haven't increased detox, right? Now we have these deflection centers, which, if we're going to engage people, if we're going to arrest them, let's use it effectively. And a sign-in sheet is not the way to go. So that's where I think there's no light between probably where we're at on that. Deflection is important, but it also needs to be effective.
I had initially thought of this as a discussion to talk about the differences, and very quickly realized that the same thing that you did. So, do one of you feel comfortable talking about what the plan is with the sign-in sheets, or the limited scope, which is what brings us together?
I could throw out my understanding so far. So right now, what it sounds like the plan is police stop somebody, which for like a possession charge, offer them a choice of jail or deflection. If they choose deflection, they're transported to a location where essentially they're not going to go through the criminal justice process. At that point, where hopefully we would have some sort of intervention, non-criminal intervention, to help them deal with the addiction. As I understand it now, they can simply choose not to engage and walk away, and they can do this an unlimited number of times, which is where I think a lot of the concern pops up.
That's my understanding too, right? And nothing's decided yet, right? That's sort of what's being proposed, and I think the problem with it is it's just like cops didn't want to write the Measure 110 tickets because there's nothing attached to them. Why in the world would you arrest someone and then drop them off just so that they can sign in and leave, right? I think that's going to be a significant problem. But more importantly, we're putting all these resources into it. Let's make it work. You know, I got sober because of consequences in my life, right? In my case, I was a privileged 46-year-old guy living in San Francisco at the time. And I lost my job. I lost my family. I lost my health. I lost my savings. Didn't lose my housing. I still had friends. I still and I never got arrested or anything like that. But there was enough negative things in my life that one day I just woke up and had my moment of clarity, as we say, and reached out for help. And thankfully, there was help there. Uh, and you know, there was this great article in the Atlantic about a year ago that Sam Kionis wrote, and at the end of it, he said the problem isn't that we relied on the criminal justice system to intervene in people's drug use; it's that we only relied on it, right? And uh, the science of addiction, the science of recovery says people respond to consequences. And so we should have a set of staggering consequences that that create more and more pressure on folks to be ready. This notion of, well, treatment doesn't work if people aren't ready. Well, that's not true. The drug courts have virtually the same success rate as people who voluntarily go to treatment. Um, uh, Number one, and number two, we as a society, you as a law enforcement officer, me as a recovery advocate, we can help people be more ready by creating more consequences for them.
Yeah. I think that moment of intervention, we're creating a moment of possibility
Yeah,
for some change. And, you know, what a shame to squander it. And you're right, police, if they learn that I take this guy there, nothing happens.
yeah,
Why am I going to risk all of the liability that comes with dealing with this person, putting them in my car and driving them while they just used fentanyl or whatever and may
right.
overdose in the back seat here or
Right.
something? Why am I going to go through all that if nothing happens on the back end? Which means that whatever harms that may have existed at the point where they were stopped aren't mitigated
Right.
also. And I think one thing that for me has been sort of missing in the conversation is there's like two parts to this. So we absolutely need to be effective in helping the person who has an addiction.
Right.
But like most of the people who are stopped for this are going to be people who like are probably using in the open,
Yep.
probably in very late stage addiction, and they're causing a lot of sort of the surrounding harm.
Yep.
And I think the public's frustration that led to recriminalization wasn't really about are there criminal consequences for this person. It's I don't want to have to put up with somebody smoking in front of my business, or and so I think that is missing from, like, some people are very focused just on the addict.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we address both. And I don't think this deflection gives like effective tools for addressing the external harms.
Right. Like, people are not going to call the police even if they see someone out using, if they don't think anything's going to happen. And we're we're not meeting the moment with this concept of deflection at the moment, in that the politics in Portland have become way more conservative. To your point, people are more like, we just need to clean this up. Whether that's the right response or not, like, that's where the politics have moved to, and so we have to take advantage of that people are open to us trying things in a different way.
Yeah.
And this, the advocates for Measure 110, who are really well intentioned and believe strongly in what they're doing, and really view the criminal justice system as a really traumatizing experience for young people of color, and which may very well be true. I'm sure it is. However, taking a hit of meth or taking a hit of fentanyl, or drinking yourself to oblivion, that's way more physically, emotionally, and mentally traumatizing than either going through the criminal justice system or being sent to a treatment center that's mediocre at best, right? Like, the notion that bad treatment is traumatizing. No, yes, maybe, but not in the context of people continuing to use.
You know what I appreciate about this is, I think one of our problems in Portland has been people operate from vague, sort of ideological positions, and what I have found is both police and people who work directly with, whether it's homeless people or addicts or whatever, you can see the nuance.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
you
yeah.
spend time like up close with it. yeah, it's not. There's no simple slogan or silver
Right.
bullet for fixing any of this stuff.
Well, just recognizing that, I think another challenge we have is that harm reduction we know works, right? It saves people's lives. And many of the folks that brought harm reduction into this space are people that came out of the HIV, the AIDS crisis. You know, as a gay man, I'm really conscious of that. As someone who, in my drug use, I seroconverted and have HIV, and got Hep C. So completely appreciative of this. But in the context of AIDS, it's all about just keeping the disease from spreading, right?
Yeah.
And the person's actual use is not part of that conversation, although it should be. But now that that sort of element of the public health community have moved into this space, there isn't the acknowledgement that um, the, the the best form of harm reduction is no use at all, and that all of the harm reduction conversations need to be coupled with a level of conversation, not necessarily up front, you build trust, but at some point talking to individuals about using less drugs, drinking less alcohol, and uh, that culturally is a challenge here. And so I think, when Measure 110 passed, a whole bunch of organizations just automatically jumped on board because of the disproportionate impact that the existing system was having on people of color, and uh, without giving thought and consideration to the actual underlying addiction for some of the folks involved in it. And um, I'm sort of affirming what you said in that it's just there's way more nuance involved, and there's both sides of it that need to be considered, not just one side, the criminal justice aspect of it.
You know, something that I really think about a lot lately with all these conversations is, so personally, I signed up for like the marijuana policy project back in like '99
Oh
or
yeah,
something like that. I will always like the idea of decriminalization, and actually didn't have a ton of experience before becoming a police officer with addiction.
right.
Um, but all these conversations we have are so shaped by the drug war,
Yeah,
war on drugs,
right.
and the problem with the war on drugs was that it had no nuance. It treated marijuana and heroin like they were the same.
Right.
And the problem with Measure 110 is
Yeah.
it treats heroin like it's marijuana.
Yep.
And, I think even substance by substance, if they had come in and said, we're going to decriminalize psilocybin,
Yeah.
we're going to take a few years, work on treatment capacity, see how it goes. And, that just taking a measured approach could have had such a different outcome.
Well, and we tried to engage the Drug Policy Alliance, Oregon Recovers, and they didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to consult with anybody here other than the folks who ultimately signed up to be on their side in this whole thing. And it was deeply frustrating because the state was going through a whole strategic planning process around how to come up with a plan to address the addiction crisis. And had they participated in that process, we would be, number one, that plan would be way stronger, which Kate Brown then ignored once it was produced. Um, uh, but they wouldn't have written Measure 110 the way they did. It was just with such a blind spot to what's the science of people's substance use and what's the science of recovery. No regard for that whatsoever, and um, that's what we've been dealing with.
Oregon is comparatively an easy state to get things
Yeah.
on the ballot. So if you haven't heard us refer to it as a petri dish, for this, we really are. So
I'll let you finish your
Oh,
bite. But I guess my next question for you is, what would you like to see happen at drop off, at deflection? What do you think is a good balance?
yeah. So I don't have a concrete set of it, but I think what should occur is that there is an extended period of time in which that person has to be there, and that they have to engage with um, someone around a health assessment and a sort of uh, their drug use assessment, um, and uh, and then if they don't choose to take whatever's recommended they do, maybe the first time, okay, we're planting the seed. I mean, there's a saying in AA that, once you go to have AA in your head, you can start drinking again, but you can never enjoy it again because it just is there. And it's true. Like, we have to recognize that it's a chronic condition, that some people respond to treatment. Like, I went to treatment finally when I was 46. I haven't had a drink or drug ever since 16 years ago. That's really unique. My husband has relapsed multiple times over the years. So it's, like I said earlier, I think we need staggering impacts. Like if you're brought in for the second time in a month, that there's some other significant thing. Uh, uh, but all of it should be related to care until there's like, it's your fifth time in 4 weeks. Then we should look at what is the criminal justice consequence to that. All of that needs to be, as they've said it is in House Bill 4002, that you have rapid expungement. That's a really key part of this.
Yeah.
But it's nice to say, let's have rapid expungement when we have IT systems that once you put information in them, extracting them is really expensive, particularly for local governments. And so I have yet to see anyone say how that's actually going to occur. And that to me is a huge concern. And so if we can do this deflection process and people don't actually make it into the system somehow, but I don't know if that can happen, because if you want to take their drugs away when you arrest someone, you have to charge them with a misdemeanor, right? And then
it'd be interesting to see what the text ends up being.
So my understanding is
Yeah.
the whole reason that cops weren't enforcing the Measure 110 tickets and taking drugs, and Aaron and I got into this on a panel that Vadim had set up, and he was saying, no, that's the personal property on Measure 110. Those drugs are the personal property of the person using. And I was like, no, Aaron, it's contraband. We didn't decriminalize the actual drugs. We decriminalized the possession of those drugs. It doesn't mean that cops can't take contraband, but it requires.
Yeah, it created a lot of legal gray space. For instance, if you stop somebody to write the Measure 110 ticket, could they just walk away? And we went back and forth several times with the city attorney and DA's office and heard a lot of interpretations. But there were a lot of things that had never been considered before. And so, when in doubt,
Right.
the legally safe thing to do is, you tell me something's a crime, I got clear authority here, clear governmental interest. You tell me it's a violation?
What's frustrating about that is that the Attorney General's office said absolutely you can take drugs away from people. It's like, if they put them in their pocket, that's where the problem is, that if it's a violation, you can't search them, but you can, persuade them to take it out if you saw it, Sure, it wasn't going to be perfect, but there was a solution there. And the thing I liked about the tickets was it didn't create a criminal record. But what was really flawed about that, and we tried to change it in the legislature, but the advocates for Measure 110 didn't want to do it, is that information get recorded, those tickets, and automatically given to a peer service organization, so that we just didn't rely on people to call that number that was buried somewhere on that ticket, but that there was proactive outreach to the people that were receiving it. That's what an intervention system, non-criminal justice-based intervention system, is. Use the cops to make the connection, but then use the healthcare system to do the intervention. And that just never, we were so polarized on that whole thing, it just never happened. But I'm not sure the thing about deflection, my question for you is, my understanding under House Bill 4002 is you as a cop get to decide whether to offer deflection. You can just book them into jail. And to me, that makes the cops really vulnerable of being accused of taking sides. Like, you're only putting black people in jail and not white people, or, you offer deflection to someone that has a long record and they shouldn't have been given deflection, right? And they go and do something, right? Like it
Discretion is a double-edged sword.
Yes, totally.
I mean,
and
it's helpful because you might say, here's a person who's never been engaged,
mm-hmm.
who has their stuff together and is experimenting something, and it's fine.
Right.
this person go about their life. But it also means you could be like, could do something for the wrong reason.
Yeah. It seems to me it makes everybody vulnerable to bad accusations.
Yeah.
And bad behavior, right? The other thing that's weird is that every county is going to be different, right? And
Mhm.
so Will Lathrop was actually talking about this yesterday. He doesn't think it's constitutionally that 4002 was constitutionally sound because people can argue, well, wait a minute, going to jail in Multnomah County or in Clackamas County, but the same person in Multnomah County doing the exact same thing isn't going to jail. That isn't, you can't like argue that uh, that that's not constitutional. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't even know how to explain it. But
even the lawyers might not know what the
yeah,
the answer is
yeah,
for a
maybe
while.
untested, right?
Yeah.
I've had my opposition to 4002 called niche, and my personal opposition, not organizational, was that issue. So basically, what happens to somebody in Klamath Falls could be very
Right.
different, and what happens on my corner here with two different people in the same instance. Two of us could be sitting there smoking meth. An officer can come by and decide to take me to deflection and the other person to jail, which opens up a big potential for allegations of discrimination. And so the city does have to have, I think municipalities have to have a considered policy because the law didn't spell it out.
Yeah.
To the actual drop off and what happens. For me,
Yeah, what do you think should happen?
Lots of things would be better than the current situation, right? I don't want people to just walk away.
Right.
So I like the idea of sort of moving up through stages,
Mhm.
right? Are you a person we talked to one time, and otherwise you're okay,
Right.
but if it's 5 times in a month, there's something very serious going on here.
Right.
So I like that. I do want something to be mandatory. I think I said this online, and maybe it's too flippant, but I'm like, we should be willing to exert the social pressure that a timeshare salesman is willing to exert just to try to get somebody into treatment.
Right.
One thing I've heard is people say, well, there's not enough treatment
Yeah,
availability,
right.
which I know is true, and that has to be taken into account.
Yep.
But still, if you give me 4 hours when you get dropped off,
Right.
that is enough time for any potential harm at the location where the initial stop happened to be mitigated. There is some consequence, even if it's just a brief movement and separation from whatever was going on. I think that itself is somewhat effective and would tamp down some of the most like brazen, sort of antisocial using.
I think this is a really important point, and I just know myself when I was using meth 16 years ago, if I sort of was up for a couple days and then went to sleep for 2 or 3 hours, I woke up and I went back to using. Like, I was feeling awful, whatever. Lots of times I would just pass out for 15 hours, right? Because had sleep deprivation. And when I woke up at the 15 hours, I felt awful. I didn't ever want to use meth again. But then I could have a conversation with somebody, and that's kind of trying to create distance for folks to actually be able to make sound judgments, which is that much harder with fentanyl and this meth that's putting people into psychosis almost right away. And sustained overdoses and being brought back to life with Narcan is creating a brain injury in folks, and so they don't have the cognitive capacity to make these decisions. So I think time at the deflection center, like incremental, just like, okay, the first time come in, you have to be here for 4 hours and have a health assessment, and we try and direct you. The next time you have to stay overnight, or whatever, like that. Those, because people want to go back out and use again. What we don't have enough is detox, which is the challenge, right? So if we keep someone overnight on fentanyl, they're going to need to go to detox in that circumstance, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And so, do we have mandatory detox? These are important conversations that aren't happening by September 1st, right? And So, and I guess in fairness to Mike Schmidt and Jessica, maybe we should all just sort of take a pause and say, okay, what's the first thing that we need, and then what's the second and third thing that we can get to, because the time frame is so short. I don't think that's how they're thinking, but it might be that we need to give a little grace on what's designed originally may not be what ultimately it evolves into.
Mike, you mentioned just for the OHA report, the numbers on that. I'm happy to, but
No, you do it.
so there's a report. There was a final report released last week, not counting youth beds, independent outpatient. There were some other glaring vacancies. By the end of next year, Oregon needs 2,400 additional beds, specifically for substance use disorder, to keep up with the demand that's out there. That's not any other psych beds at all. So it's pretty jarring. Eli, there's one point that I always hammer on, which is we're talking about the sobering center, we're talking about deflection, but if at the opposite end of the scale we don't have recovery housing, which is something you probably know, the continuum is not complete.
Yeah.
And recovery housing beds are fortunately
I
counted.
so I've been involved in a pilot program between the Bike Squad downtown and the Behavioral Health Resource Center.
Yep.
And some other groups.
Yeah,
But the
MHA.
basic idea was you stop these people for a Measure 110 ticket who clearly have an issue, and there's these nonprofits. It'd be nice to connect them in this moment, and the phone line wasn't working, and so been involved in trying to do that, which seems like, again, this
The
is
phone
a
line, which phone?
Well, the one you're supposed to call after you get the Measure 110.
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
So again, it's just an attempt to create a where intervention is possible.
Yeah.
But of course, each time I participate in this, they'd go at the beginning and they'd be like, what do we have available? And it might be like, we have 2 beds.
Right.
It's like, all right, we're going to go stop 30 people. And you know, and a lot of people without some sort of compulsion are not interested in taking those beds. But yeah, there's absolutely a shortage. I hear from people all the time. Well, I would go to treatment, but the wait is this long.
Yeah.
And if I really think if somebody says, all right, I'm ready, like we got to be able to just put him in a van and like go.
Right. We like someone goes to the emergency room because they broke their arm. We don't say, well, come back every morning for the next 3 days to see if we can get you into the emergency room. Right. Like, but that, so this is my understanding about the program downtown that you just referenced, was that the peers that were working with MHAO and the resource center were able to get people into detox at Recovery Works Northwest, which just opened their detox. Fora and Hooper turned 50% of the people away every morning who line up to get to detox. And so you know that there'd be way more people if they knew they were going to get in there. That's been going on for years, which is just a crime. The city, like why the city has allowed the fact that why didn't we triple detox? And then you go through detox, you don't necessarily have someplace to go. It's why we need more recovery housing. But when I talked to the folks at Recovery Works Northwest, what they were saying was the peers were scooping people up with the cops who said, yeah, I'll go to detox. They took them over there, and then they were gone within hours because they were, as they started coming down, they weren't ready. Like we need a sobering center to help people sort of sleep it off or whatever. But we also need sort of transitional, and which is not transitional housing or a transitional component or stabilization component, actually, where that maybe is mandatory, where people can sort of make their decisions more soundly. And now it's hard because people start detoxing off fentanyl, almost like coming down off fentanyl. They need to get more fentanyl pretty quickly, otherwise they're in huge pain. But we're not addressing that issue, like that the disconnection of people not having, they're either making a decision while they're on the street there, like, oh sure, I'll go to detox, but they're high, they haven't really thought it through. They get there and 4 hours later they walk out the door, and then that bed sits empty that night. Right. You know, it's and again, we don't have anyone at the city level or the county level who's sort of creating this, connecting this continuum of care. We just keep allocating money to the different, more money for recovery housing. Recovery Works Northwest reprogrammed Measure 110 money so that they could open detox, because originally the Measure 110 committee wouldn't fund the creation of detox facilities. Well, because Medicaid will cover the cost of yeah. And also there was just the culture on the Measure 110 committee that traditional treatment was not what Measure 110 was about.
Yeah, there's definitely, and it's controversial to some people, but there is a need somewhere along this line for some sort of compulsion.
Mm-hmm.
And it might not be for that first time person, but there's a need for it. And especially for the people who are in the really late stage stuff, who really have no free will anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think in that case, compulsion is the compassionate thing to do. It's what I would want for myself, for family members. And like I said earlier, I didn't have much experience with addiction before becoming a police officer. But after having spent so much time with it, like it really is just an amazingly terrible thing. And I've seen the same person Narcan multiple times in a single work shift. And there's quite a few people who aren't out there anymore.
Yeah, right.
Who we used to Narcan. So certainly we need some serious change.
And meth is equally a problem, right? Like, and the psychosis that comes with it. And you can take, we not intervene, but my husband had a sponsee and called us up one day and was like, I'm in a meth psychosis, come take care of me. So we took him to the hospital. He spent the night in the hospital. Then he came back to our house. And then I got him into treatment the next day because I know who to call. Yeah. And he worked at Intel, so he had great insurance. But he came back from treatment 3 weeks later and he was still a little crazy, right? Like he still kind of heard voices. Like, folks have really long-term sustained, if not permanent, cognitive damage from fentanyl and meth right now in a way that we didn't used to. Like when I was using it, you didn't have that experience. So, which makes it that much harder. But we're not having these conversations. We're not driving towards outcomes. And nobody in the city, they don't get money for behavioral health, and so nobody's really focused on that per se. And yet, it's like, how much of your job is dealing with people's behavioral health issues versus just their, sober criminal activity?
Yeah, 75, 25.
Yeah, right, right.
There seemed to have been a lot of focus in the decriminalizing on why Portugal has done it. Well, I've been over there. I've seen the safe use sites and met with the social workers and the adjudicators, although they wouldn't call themselves that name there. And I always thought in adding new penalties, there was really more of a lesson that could be learned there, because you're coming in to the Deflection Center, you ought to have a social worker that talks about your situation. And we're not going to get to the adjudication side there because it's functionally adjudicated. You went there, so you're not going to jail. Done.
Right.
But I think that's something that it's disheartening to see that the county is going so, how do I say it, path of least resistance here and following the state's law. So, and I also think there's a real question about what's going to happen in 8 months when we have a different DA and how that's going to factor into operations.
We seem to have a real a lack of vision. There's no boldness,
right,
to what we're doing. We have an emergency.
We're not meeting the moment by any stretch of the imagination, right? Like, look at COVID. Governor Brown set up 2 field hospitals the very first week, and then they ended up not being used. Why did we not do that 3 years ago relative to detox, stabilization, treatment? It's a huge problem, and we're doing reports, and we're allocating a lot of money. God knows there's a lot of money out there, and good things are happening with that money, but it's not driving towards. Nobody can sit there and say, we're going to reduce the addiction rate by this percent, and we're going to increase the recovery rate by this percent. Until we have that plan, it's going to be a lot of Band-Aids.
Yeah, emergencies are a time to shake things up.
Right. Like, as Obama said, in every crisis is opportunity.
Winston Churchill, let no crisis go to waste.
I'd rather give it to Obama. So what do you like within the police force? Are people burnt out about this? Are they optimistic about like take the let's say we get the deflection system that at least is in the direction that we all want it to go, right? Are cops enthused about that, or is there an element that just is like, let's just arrest them, like it's not our problem to deal with this?
I think for police, one, there's a big focus on the like what when I go to the spot where there's the conflict, what do I do?
Right.
And is there a clear thing that I can do that actually makes this better? And so I can tell you, the police were very unhappy with Measure 110.
Right.
And many times the public let me know that they were unhappy with what the police could do under Measure 110. So I think one, we went to recriminalization. That was encouraging. That
right.
The thing I'm seeing, the problems that the public now recognizes there's an issue here, and they want us to do more about it.
Yep.
Police have a lot of firsthand experience with this stuff, and we in Portland don't have a very harsh culture,
right?
And yeah, I think I think people are probably pretty dismayed by the news about the deflection.
Yeah,
but I think as long as if that turns into something where whether you take them to jail for 4 hours, which is what it'd be, or you take them to deflection for 4 hours, as long as you know that I solved this momentary problem and there's hope that we're gonna make some sort of progress here, I think everybody would feel pretty happy about
right.
That.
That makes sense. So this is a little bit of a off non sequitur, but because dispatch plays a role in this too now, right? And I had a situation where a friend 2 houses down from my house called me on a Saturday night or texted me and said, "Are you home?" And I was in an Uber on my way home. I said, "Well, I'll be there soon. What's up?" And she said, "There's someone having a mental health crisis on my front porch, pounding on the door, and I've called the police twice." And the dispatcher could even hear, I've learned subsequently, hear the guy pounding on the door, said they were going to send cops, and nobody ever showed up. And the dispatcher didn't say, "Oh, call the county behavioral health crisis unit," or like they didn't take any responsibility for it. And so, of course, everyone in our neighborhood was mad at the cops, but that really, to me, was a dispatch issue, right? Like,
obviously, I'm not hearing the initial call. Here's my first thought. Something like that, the caller's not the owner of the house, probably not the owner, somebody in like a unusual mental state, we have a possible crime involved.
Yeah.
They're not going to send Project Respond or any sort of mental health thing before police come. There's no physical violence happening. The person hasn't broken in. There's concern here, but that call is going to get prioritized based on the danger.
Right.
And this is in the evening. So I'm going to guess, and depending on the evening, this call might have been for the city, the 80th call in line at that moment. So it's quite common to simply run out of police and then the calls to just begin backing up, especially in the evening. So it all depends. One night, you might have gotten a police officer there right away.
Right.
If a shooting happened across town, the next night, it could be 4 or 5 hours.
Right.
So
here's the second part of this. The next day is the Irvington St. Patrick's Day Parade. And I'm trying to get from Broadway to my house at Siskiyou, and along Tillamook is the parade route. And as I drive down parallel, every intersection is closed off with a motorcycle cop. There was at least 5 motorcycle cops at all of these things.
Yeah.
So we can close off. We have enough cops to close off traffic for the Irvington St. Patrick's Day Parade, which I'm a huge supporter of. But we don't have enough cops on Saturday night.
Yeah.
Like, how does that? And that just.
So, I mean, the planned event, obviously, they're probably pulling people in
for overtime. Yep.
But we absolutely do not have enough to predictably make sure the response times are good, especially in the evening.
Right.
So.
But isn't Saturday night like the night that you get the most calls, and Friday and Saturday night?
They portion the number on a shift based on the average number of calls and all of that. So they adjusted to that. But I can tell you, just in the last 7 years since I've been doing it, the number that they're able to field on a shift has declined.
Yeah.
Declined. and we're at 1.2 police per 1,000 residents. At this point, we were 2.2 in 1995, so we almost shrank by half relative to the
Right.
population since then.
And my understanding is that's really small to begin with relative to other major cities in the country.
So Seattle has about 25% more per capita.
Yeah.
San Francisco has 50% more per capita.
Oh, God.
Boston has either 2.5 or 3 times more per capita. We're at the bottom, and different places have different levels of
Right.
demand, but our demand has really surged in the last
Right.
5-6 years.
Again, we're not meeting the moment, but
and frankly, our system is easily overwhelmed. Yeah, you get a murder. Normal stuff's not getting responded to.
right. You
Any
wanna-
last thoughts on deflection?
No, I like. I do think that we have to give whatever comes about the opportunity to prove itself either right or wrong, right? Like it's, and I hope that the cops will, no matter how unimportant it seems, will do their part of it, even if it's a sign-in sheet, which you and I are both completely against. But that's the way we're going to change it, is if you're delivering people and they're just walking out the door, as opposed to not delivering those people so nobody knows that it's not working. You know what I mean? So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I also think that what's been proposed right now, the backlash against that is so significant that I can't imagine we're not going to have something more robust. I hope.
I hope so. Clearly, there's a need for us to do something
Right.
different. And I totally think we should be flexible. It should be about outcomes. And yeah, like if we're outcome focused and we're willing to be flexible here, I don't see why we can't come up with something better than what we've had.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that the mayor and the Portland City Council are weighing in with the county too. Like, it's the county's decision to set this thing up, but it's the city that's going to be most impacted by it. You know, so.
Thanks, guys.
Nice talking.